The night was silent, wrapped in an air of mystery and romance. Maud Adams, a beautiful young woman with a heart full of love, sat on the edge of her bed, anxiously waiting for her husband. The room was dark, with only a hint of moonlight slipping through the curtains, casting a soft glow that heightened the thrill of the evening. Her heart raced with excitement, her fingers tapping nervously against her dress. It was her wedding night, a moment she had dreamt of since she was a young girl. Maud had spent days, weeks even, preparing for this night. She wanted it to be perfect, a night filled with love, laughter and intimacy with the man she had given her heart to. The memory of their wedding day danced in her mind. She had felt so proud walking down the aisle, eyes locked on Hugh, who stood at the altar waiting for her, a look of unreadable intent in his gaze. To Maud, it looked like love. She was certain he felt the same emotions she did. How could she have known otherwise? Tonight, the air was thick with anticipation. The silence in the room seemed to stretch on forever. Maud closed her eyes, her heart racing, imagining the life they were about to start together. She wondered what he would say when he entered, how he would touch her, the warmth of his embrace. Every part of her was eager for the moment when he would finally join her. The door creaked open, and Maud's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't see him yet, but she felt his presence. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, heightening her anticipation. She smiled to herself, feeling her cheeks flush in the darkness. This was the moment she had been waiting for. As the figure approached, she felt his hand on her shoulder. The touch was firm, almost unfamiliar. Maud's smile faltered slightly, but she brushed it off as nervousness. After all, it was their first night together. She reached up to touch his hand, but something felt off. His fingers were rough, not the hands she remembered holding during their dances or tender moments. A strange feeling of unease began to build in her chest. She pulled her hand away, glancing towards where he stood, although she could barely make out his silhouette in the dim light. Her mind raced with thoughts. What was this feeling? Why did his touch feel so foreign? Her instincts screamed at her, but she ignored them, convincing herself it was just her nerves. Yet the unsettling sensation continued to gnaw at her. The room was cloaked in silence again, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Then, almost involuntarily, her hand reached out to the nightstand beside her, her fingers fumbling for the light switch. With a flick of her thumb, the room was bathed in a soft, warm light. She blinked, her eyes adjusting, and turned her gaze toward him. What she saw made her blood run cold. This wasn't her husband. Standing before her was a man she had never seen before. His face held a smirk, one that sent shivers down her spine. He looked at her with an intensity that felt invasive, his eyes dark and calculating, void of the warmth she had once thought she saw in Hugh's. Maud's mind reeled, her thoughts spiraling. Who was this man? Where was Hugh? Her body tensed as she realized the danger she was in. The excitement she had felt mere moments ago was replaced by a sharp, terrifying fear. She sprang from the bed, stumbling backward, her heart racing. She could barely breathe, her mind flooded with questions and panic. Every step she took backward he matched with one forward, closing the distance between them. The walls seemed to close in around her, trapping her in this nightmare. The man extended his hand toward her, his fingers curling in a mocking invitation. Maud shook her head, her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to shout for help, but her voice betrayed her. All she could do was stare at him, her mind racing, her body frozen with fear. The stranger took another step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. The smirk on his face widened, a twisted sense of satisfaction evident in his gaze. Maud felt the ground slipping from beneath her feet, her mind barely able to process what was happening. She had waited for her husband, but now she stood face to face with a nightmare. In that instant, Maud's world shattered. Everything she had believed, every hope and dream she had nurtured, crumbled around her. This was not the night she had envisioned, not the life she had wanted. She had been betrayed in the most horrifying way, her trust shattered in an instant. With one last burst of strength, Maud turned and ran, her only thought to escape this twisted, horrifying scene. She could hear his footsteps behind her, quickening as he pursued her, but she didn't dare look back. She threw open the door, her breath coming in desperate gasps, her heart pounding as she raced into the night. College days, a love story or a dark obsession? Years before the fateful wedding night, Maud Adams and Hugh Jackman were college students, living in the rush and excitement of campus life. Maud, a dedicated and diligent student, was known around campus for her intelligence and warmth. She had an undeniable charm and was both admired and respected by her peers. Her deep, soulful eyes and radiant smile made her stand out, but it was her kindness and resilience that left a lasting impression on those who knew her. Hugh, on the other hand, was a striking figure in his own way. Tall, athletic, and with an effortless charm, he could easily command attention without trying. But beneath his good looks and smooth talk lay a reputation that wasn't as polished as he liked people to believe. While Maud spent her days buried in textbooks, dedicating herself to a future of hard work and achievement, Hugh was often seen lingering around the campus lounges and sports fields, a familiar face at every social gathering. Their paths first crossed in a library on a rainy day. Hugh, glancing over at Maud from across the room, saw her engrossed in her studies, completely unaware of his gaze. Intrigued by her seriousness and a challenge he sensed in her focused demeanor, he made his way over to her table. At first, Maud barely noticed him, lost in her studies. But Hugh, with his well-practiced charm, struck up a conversation, joking about the gloomy weather and the endless pile of assignments they both faced. For Maud, it was a chance meeting that quickly blossomed into something she had never expected. Over time, she found herself captivated by Hugh's confidence and carefree approach to life. He brought an energy and excitement that felt like a breath of fresh air, a contrast to her otherwise disciplined and orderly life. They became inseparable on campus, spending hours together between classes, at lunch, and in the quiet corners of the campus gardens. What Maud didn't realize was that Hugh's intentions weren't as genuine as her own. While she saw his attention as a sign of affection, for Hugh, Maud was more of a conquest, a way to pass the time and perhaps even gain some benefits academically. He would ask her to help with assignments, often under the guise of wanting to study together. Maud, who believed in the best of people, saw his requests as a sign of their growing closeness, never questioning his motives. Hugh was far from the devoted boyfriend she thought he was. He was known to have a wandering eye, casually flirting with other girls when Maud wasn't around, yet he would always return to her when he needed help or company. For him, Maud was a convenient ally, someone he could lean on without making any real commitments. But for Maud, every moment spent together strengthened her feelings, and she slowly began to imagine a future with him, a future he was far from envisioning himself. One evening, as they walked through the campus, Maud opened up about her dreams, sharing her aspirations and hopes for life after college. She was passionate, speaking of her desire to make a difference in the world, to achieve something meaningful. Hugh listened, but his mind was elsewhere, barely engaging with the vision she held so dear. To him, these dreams were just talk, something he would nod along to, but without any true interest. The irony was that while Maud admired him for his seemingly relaxed and charming demeanor, she didn't see the darkness he harbored within. Beneath the smiles and casual compliments, Hugh held deep prejudices, especially about people who didn't meet his superficial standards. He was a man who saw the world through a narrow lens, and his opinions were often guided by his own self-interest and hidden biases. For Maud, however, love had a way of blinding her to these red flags. Every time he gave her attention, she felt reassured. She was convinced that their differences were simply part of what made their connection unique. Her friends, watching from the sidelines, sometimes questioned the relationship, noticing how one-sided it often seemed. But Maud, in her innocence and optimism, brushed aside their concerns, seeing only the potential she believed lay within him. As time passed, Maud's love for Hugh grew deeper. She believed she was witnessing the softer, more vulnerable side of him. In her eyes, he was someone who, despite his flaws, was capable of growth and change. She was determined to be there for him, hoping her love could inspire him to be the best version of himself. Hugh, however, never shared these ideals. While Maud dreamt of a shared life, filled with purpose and love, Hugh merely saw her as a phase, something to enjoy before moving on to whatever came next. Maud's innocence and devotion were traits he found useful, even amusing, but never something he intended to cherish. She was a stepping stone, a temporary comfort, and nothing more. As college came to an end, Maud saw the opportunity to take their relationship to the next level, unaware that Hugh's intentions had never aligned with her dreams. Innocent love meets dark reality. After college, Maud's feelings for Hugh had only grown stronger, filling her heart with hope and joy. With her degree in hand and a promising job lined up, she felt ready to build a life with him. To her, Hugh was her true love, the person she had waited for her whole life. She thought that they shared a connection deep enough to face any challenges. But for Hugh, things were far from the love story Maud had envisioned. As Maud settled into her new job, she continued to support Hugh, both emotionally and financially. Hugh, still uncertain about his own future, leaned on her more and more, taking her support for granted. Whenever he was in trouble or needed a favor, Maud was always there, offering him help with a smile. Her friends began to notice how one-sided the relationship seemed, worried that she was giving too much of herself to someone who barely reciprocated. Yet Maud waved off their concerns, convinced that Hugh simply needed time to grow. One evening, Maud gathered the courage to propose a future together, hoping to take their relationship to the next level. She envisioned a life where they would support each other, where their love would grow stronger with time. Nervous but excited, she planned a romantic dinner where she would finally share her dreams with him. When she proposed to Hugh, pouring out her heart and love, he looked stunned. The weight of her words seemed to hang in the air, but not in the way she had hoped. Though he reluctantly agreed, Maud couldn't see the uncertainty and discomfort hidden behind his smile. Deep down, Hugh's prejudices and hidden feelings held him back from truly loving her. He saw their differences as barriers, his heart clouded by prejudice he'd never admitted to anyone. Maud, however, took his hesitant acceptance as a commitment. She was thrilled, believing that her love had finally been recognized. She began making plans for their future together, pouring her heart into creating a home and life where they would be happy. She took time off from work, inviting her family and friends to share in her joy, dedicating herself fully to preparing for their wedding. She spent days shopping for the perfect dress, making arrangements and ensuring every detail was flawless, her heart overflowing with happiness. Meanwhile, Hugh's reaction to the engagement was starkly different. Rather than excitement, he felt trapped, unable to escape the commitment he had unintentionally stepped into. He had no intentions of buying anything for the wedding or planning a future. Instead, he found himself spending more time in bars, indulging in his vices, and escaping the reality he felt was closing in on him. It was at one of these bars that he met a group of gamblers, and, lost in the allure of the games, he quickly fell into a destructive pattern, squandering money that he didn't even have. One night, after losing a large sum, he found himself in trouble. The bar's owner demanded payment, but Hugh, desperate and unwilling to face the consequences of his actions, begged for a way out. In his desperation, he made a reckless promise. With the wedding fast approaching, he assured the bar owner that he would allow him access to the bridal suite on the wedding night, a twisted plan that would settle his debt. The bar owner, intrigued and amused by the proposition, accepted, sealing Maud's fate without her knowledge. Back at home, Maud remained blissfully unaware of the dark reality Hugh had drawn her into. She continued to prepare, her love and excitement blinding her to the signs of his growing indifference. The innocent love she held in her heart was met with a cold, calculating betrayal, a betrayal she wouldn't discover until it was too late. The proposal and deception. As the wedding day approached, Maud's excitement grew. She had poured herself into every detail, creating the wedding she had dreamed of since she was a young girl. From the invitations to the floral arrangements, every part of the celebration bore her loving touch. To her, this was the culmination of years of devotion, the beginning of a life filled with love, warmth, and companionship. She had faith in Hugh, blind to the warning signs her friends and family had tried to point out. Hugh, however, had a far different view of the day. What should have been a time for preparation and excitement felt more like a looming burden. He resented the commitment he had half-heartedly agreed to, feeling suffocated by the thought of a life with Maud. As she spent her days preparing for the wedding, he spent his nights at the bar, drinking away his doubts and fears, drowning his mind in alcohol, and making reckless decisions that would soon come back to haunt him. Maud's family arrived from out of town, filling her house with laughter and joy. They were thrilled to see her so happy, eagerly anticipating the wedding that was only a few days away. Her mother helped with the final touches on her dress, her siblings helped decorate, and everyone celebrated what they thought was Maud's new beginning. But behind the smiles, a growing sense of anxiety began to creep into Maud's heart. She brushed it off as wedding day jitters, a natural feeling before such a significant moment. Hugh, on the other hand, wasn't even present in the preparations. He was spending more time at the bar than ever, lost in a haze of alcohol and gambling. He avoided the reality that was quickly approaching, choosing instead to ignore the consequences of his actions. As the wedding day drew closer, he found himself drawn back to the bar's owner, the man to whom he had promised the unthinkable on his wedding night. The arrangement haunted him, but he felt trapped, too cowardly to confront Maud or break free from his debt. The night before the wedding, Hugh's reckless actions took a darker turn. In a final desperate attempt to escape his responsibility, he indulged in another night of gambling. Once again, he lost. With no money and the wedding just hours away, he pleaded with the bar owner, begging for mercy. But the owner had no sympathy for Hugh's situation. He reminded Hugh of their deal, telling him he would collect his payment the next night, and there would be no backing out. Hugh knew there was no escape from the arrangement he had made, and an overwhelming guilt washed over him. But rather than facing his own mistakes, he chose to bury them, to let the wedding continue without any sign of his betrayal. As he stood at the altar the next day, looking at Maud's radiant smile, his heart twisted with guilt, yet he remained silent, holding on to the secret that would soon tear her world apart. As the vows were exchanged, Maud gazed into Hugh's eyes. Her heart swelling with love and hope, she felt that she was finally marrying the man she had always dreamed of, the person she believed was her true love. Little did she know that the man standing across from her was hiding a betrayal so deep it would change her life forever. Hugh's deception, fueled by his selfishness and prejudice, had set a tragic chain of events in motion, a chain Maud was unaware of as she joyfully kissed her husband, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. After the ceremony, they celebrated with friends and family, dancing, laughing, and savoring the moments she thought would be the beginning of a beautiful life. But lurking beneath the surface, Hugh's dark secret waited, a ticking time bomb set to explode the moment they were alone. As the evening drew to a close, the couple prepared to head to their bridal suite, where Maud anticipated a night of romance and intimacy. But as she stepped into the room, her heart filled with excitement. She had no idea that Hugh's betrayal was about to reveal itself in the most horrifying way. The innocence of her love would soon be shattered, replaced by a nightmare she could never have imagined. A tragic wedding night, betrayal unveiled. The joyful celebration had come to an end, and Maud was radiant with happiness. She felt like she was living a fairy tale, her dreams of a life with Hugh now a beautiful reality. The guests had departed, leaving behind an atmosphere of love and laughter. As Maud entered the bridal suite, her heart fluttered with excitement and anticipation. She looked around the room, taking in the soft glow of the candles and the delicate rose petals scattered across the bed. This was the night she had been waiting for, the beginning of her new life with the man she loved. But Hugh was nowhere to be seen. She waited patiently, thinking he must be attending to last-minute details or saying goodbye to a lingering guest. Minutes passed, and her anticipation turned into a slight unease. She sat down on the edge of the bed, glancing at the clock as each second seemed to drag on endlessly. Finally, she heard the door creak open. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked up, expecting to see Hugh's familiar smile. But the man who entered wasn't her husband. A stranger stood in the doorway, his face cast in shadows, his eyes cold and calculating. Maud's heart pounded, her mind racing with confusion. She managed to whisper, "Where's Hugh?" but received only a sinister smirk in response. The man took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Maud's body tensed as an overwhelming sense of dread washed over her. She tried to stand, but he moved faster, blocking her path. The reality of the situation hit her like a blow to the chest. Hugh had not only abandoned her on their wedding night, but he had also betrayed her in a way she couldn't fathom. Terror took hold of her as the man approached, his intentions chillingly clear. She tried to push him away, her voice breaking as she pleaded for him to stop, but he was relentless, drunk with both power and alcohol. Maud struggled, her mind reeling as she realized the extent of Hugh's deception. Her dreams of love and companionship turned to ash as she fought against the nightmare she was living. In a moment of desperation, her hand found a heavy vase on the bedside table. Summoning all her strength, she struck the man on the head, the sound echoing through the room. He stumbled, momentarily dazed, and Maud seized the opportunity. She bolted for the door, her heart pounding as she fled down the hallway and out into the night. She ran blindly through the dark, her mind clouded with shock and betrayal. The air was cold against her skin, and her tears blurred her vision. But she kept running, driven by a desperate need to escape. She felt like a stranger in her own body, as if the life she had known was slipping away with each step she took. When she finally stopped, she found herself alone, surrounded by silence. The reality of what had happened hit her, and she collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. She couldn't believe the horror she had just experienced, nor could she fathom the cruelty of the man she had trusted with her heart. In that moment, she realized that the love she thought she shared with Hugh had been nothing more than a cruel illusion. Her innocence had been shattered, her dreams destroyed. The wedding night she had imagined for so long had turned into a nightmare she could never have prepared for. The warmth and joy of her marriage had been replaced by an icy emptiness, a darkness that threatened to consume her. As she sat alone in the darkness, she felt a new emotion rising within her: anger. It burned through her, fueling her with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She would not let this betrayal define her, nor would she let Hugh's cruelty break her. Maud made a silent vow to herself. She would survive this, and she would make him pay for the pain he had caused. The wedding night had transformed her from a hopeful bride into a woman determined to reclaim her life and her dignity. The pain and the plan. Rising from the ashes. The morning light crept through the curtains as Maud sat alone in her small apartment, her eyes swollen from a night of tears. She replayed the events in her mind, unable to believe the betrayal she had endured. The man she had loved, trusted, and dedicated her life to had orchestrated an act so cruel that it shattered her spirit. But in the quiet hours of dawn, as the pain settled into a dull ache, a new resolve began to grow within her. She couldn't let Hugh's betrayal be the final chapter in her life. She had been broken, humiliated, and stripped of her innocence, but she refused to be defeated. Maud knew she needed to confront her pain, face her humiliation, and find a way to reclaim her life. And more than anything, she wanted justice. She wanted Hugh to understand the depth of her pain and to face the consequences of his actions. Maud spent the next few days in silence, her mind churning with plans and possibilities. She'd always been strong, even when life threw its hardest challenges at her. This time, she needed to be stronger than ever before. She thought about every interaction with Hugh, every lie he had told, and every moment he had deceived her. She channeled her hurt and anger, letting it fuel her resolve to take back control. With each passing day, Maud's determination grew. She began formulating a plan, a way to make Hugh pay for his betrayal while ensuring he would never hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her. She knew that confronting him directly wouldn't be enough. She needed to outsmart him, to hit him where it would hurt the most. First, she reached out to him, pretending to seek closure and understanding. Hugh was caught off guard when she called, her voice calm and composed, not revealing the rage simmering beneath her words. He agreed to meet, thinking he had won, that she was still under his control. To him, Maud's call was a sign of her weakness, proof that she hadn't moved on. But he had no idea what awaited him. With her plan in motion, Maud made another call, to the police. She explained her story, detailing every horrific detail of the wedding night and Hugh's twisted arrangement with the bar owner. The officers listened, horrified by what she had endured, and agreed to help her seek justice. They would be there, hidden and ready, when Hugh arrived at her apartment, and when the bar owner would join him as part of their sinister arrangement. Maud spent the final hours preparing, steadying herself, and rehearsing the words she would say to Hugh. She could feel the strength surging through her veins, her resolve unbreakable. This time, she would be the one in control. No longer the innocent girl who had believed in his lies, she was ready to face him with a fierce determination. When the time finally arrived, Maud felt a strange calm wash over her. She knew that this was her moment, the turning point that would allow her to reclaim her life. She stood by the door, waiting, knowing that soon she would face her betrayer. The pain he had caused her had been unbearable, but now, as she prepared to confront him, she realized that it had made her stronger. The stage was set, the trap laid. This was no longer a story of betrayal. It was a story of her resilience, her courage, and her determination to rise from the ashes. The trap and the triumph. Justice delivered. Maud stood in her apartment, her heart steady, her resolve firm. She had prepared herself for this moment, her emotions tightly controlled. Soon, Hugh would walk through the door, unaware that his carefully concealed betrayal was about to be exposed in the most humiliating way possible. Hidden in a nearby room, police officers waited silently, ready to take action at her signal. Maud took a deep breath, knowing that everything she had planned had led to this moment. A knock at the door jolted her back to the present. She opened it, and there he was, Hugh standing with his familiar, arrogant smirk, as if he believed she was still under his spell. He stepped inside, completely unaware of what was coming. Maud watched him, her face calm, hiding the storm of emotions beneath her composed exterior. Moments later, the bar owner arrived, just as they had planned. Hugh's eyes flickered with a hint of confusion when Maud didn't react with the fear or submission he expected. Instead, she maintained her steely gaze, unwavering as both men settled into the room, their intentions disturbingly clear. Hugh began to speak, his tone condescending, acting as though the events of their wedding night were of little consequence. To him, Maud's pain was insignificant, something he believed he could brush off with a few empty apologies and excuses. But Maud stood her ground, her silence heavy with accusation, her eyes piercing through his facade. She knew the time had come. With a nod, she gave the signal. The officers burst from their hiding place, their presence transforming the room in an instant. Hugh and the bar owner froze, their faces a mixture of shock and horror as they realized the trap that had been set for them. The officers quickly apprehended them, handcuffing them as Maud looked on, her heart pounding with a sense of justice and triumph. As the police secured the men, Maud stepped forward, her gaze locked on Hugh's. She was no longer the woman he thought he could manipulate and discard. She was stronger, sharper, and she held all the power now. Hugh opened his mouth, scrambling to offer excuses, but Maud silenced him with a single withering look. "For so long, I believed you were the man I loved," she said, her voice steady and firm. "But you're nothing more than a coward, a selfish, heartless man who would destroy anyone who stands in his way. I was blind, but now I see exactly who you are." Hugh looked away, his arrogance gone, replaced by a look of fear and humiliation. The bar owner, too, avoided her gaze, his own shame evident. For Maud, this moment was everything she had hoped it would be, the chance to confront her betrayers and ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. As the police led them away, Maud felt a profound sense of release. The weight she had carried since that tragic night began to lift, replaced by a newfound strength and peace. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her power. The chapter of betrayal had ended, and in its place a new story began, one of resilience, courage, and justice. A new beginning, happiness restored. With Hugh and his accomplice facing justice, Maud finally felt a sense of closure. The burden of betrayal, once so heavy, had been lifted, leaving space for healing and hope. She was no longer the innocent, trusting woman who had once believed in a love that didn't exist. She had grown stronger, her spirit resilient and her heart wiser. The darkness of the past no longer controlled her, and she was ready to embrace a brighter future. In the months that followed, Maud dedicated herself to rebuilding her life. She focused on her career, reconnecting with friends and family, and rediscovering the joy she had once felt. She surrounded herself with people who genuinely cared for her, people who uplifted her, and who reminded her of her worth. Through therapy and self-care, she worked through the trauma of that painful chapter, finding peace and reclaiming her happiness. One day, while attending a friend's gathering, Maud met someone new, a kind, compassionate man who listened to her, respected her, and appreciated her for who she was. He was gentle, patient, and understanding, qualities she hadn't known she needed until now. Slowly, she opened her heart to him, feeling safe in his presence. They built a relationship founded on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. Years later, Maud stood in her cozy living room, watching her 4-year-old son play with his toys, his laughter filling the room. She had found love again, a real and honest love, that made her feel cherished and valued. Her husband walked over, wrapping his arms around her, and together they looked out at the life they had built, a life filled with joy, trust, and warmth. Maud had risen from the ashes of betrayal to create a future she could be proud of. She no longer thought of Hugh or the pain he had caused. He was a distant memory, a chapter that had shaped her, but no longer defined her. Instead, she focused on the blessings she now held, the love of her husband, the laughter of her son, and the peace she had found within herself. Her journey from heartbreak to happiness was a testament to her strength, a reminder that even the darkest nights can lead to brighter days. Maud's story was no longer one of betrayal. It was a story of resilience, transformation, and the power of self-love. She had found her happy ending, and this time, it was everything she had ever deserved.